So Premier League football returns this weekend, and we are just taking a critical look at the title race. How interested and how nervy it's been for these two teams. Now, this weekend, Arsenal will be at home. They'll be hosting Everton, while second place Manchester City will be traveling all the way from Manchester to London. At the Olympic Stadium, they'll be taking on West Ham United. Interesting games, but at this point, heading into match the 30, the point gap between Arsenal and Manchester City is a whooping 7 points. Mind you that in midweek, Arsenal managed to get a 1-0 win at the Emirates Stadium, whilst Manchester City at HEATS, where everyone thought they were going to win, actually dropped points against a struggling team like Nottingham Forest. So Nottingham Forest had to come from behind twice in that game to frustrate Manchester City to a 2-2 draw. So that means that Arsenal, having played one more game more than Manchester City, they've opened up a 7-point gap between themselves and Pep Guardiola's side. Now, let's take a deeper look into the games that these two teams will be playing, because the title race obviously is between these two powerhouses. Now, for Arsenal, they'll be at home against Everton, and they'll be playing, this Everton side that have been relentless in the last couple of weeks. They play so well, they are so compact. So Everton also will be coming into this game at the back of that comfortable 2-0 win against Burnley. Not forgetting that Burnley themselves are in the drop zone, and chances that they might survive at the Premier League is very, very, very low. So against Everton, you would always expect that Everton, will put them to the sword. But Everton traveling all the way, from the Hill Dickinson Stadium to the Emirates, where this season, the only side that have managed to beat Arsenal, in any competition at all at the Emirates has been Manchester United. And that was when, Michael Carrick took over the job on an interim basis, and they were there to beat them. So, just United having the only club to have beaten Arsenal this season at home, it tells you that Everton beating Arsenal would definitely be a tall order. But for Arsenal, they were boosted with a return of Bukayo Saka, who scored a landmark goal for them in that narrow, slender win over Brighton and Hove Albion. For Arsenal and Mikel Arteta, they wouldn't care. At least getting a 1-0 win gives them 3 points, and that is what they'll be looking at, especially also considering the fact that Manchester City failed to also close in on the league leaders. At least a win for them would have taken that point back to 5 points, which would have been more interesting. But then for Arsenal, with all the players intact now, and then also using that trick where they use the long throws, it's been quite efficient for them. Some pundits are saying that they are being dirty and all that. But then, Mikel Arteta says they wouldn't care if they should even win the Premier League title by just throwing long throws and scoring from these long throws. So for us now, over the years, we've seen them being bullied by clubs like, Chelsea, by Manchester United, even to some extent by Manchester City. But then this is that, rowdy Arsenal side. This is that aggressive Arsenal side that Everton would have to be very, very careful. Everton would always be compact at the back, with the likes of Jacob Bright, the likes of Tarkowski, Michael Keane, all forming a formidable, partnership at the back. But then you come up against, the best attacking side in the league, and it's always going to be a problem for Everton. Can they withstand Arsenal throughout 90 minutes without being broken? That is the question we need to be asking. Mikel Arteta's side would always want to hit you very, very hard, especially when you go to the Emirates. But then for a coach like David Moyes, he's always pragmatic. He wouldn't really want to go in trying to attack them, even though you have the likes of Idrissa Gana Gueye and then also James Garner in midfield, Dewsbury Hall also helping, and then also the likes of Berto and then also Liman Ndiaye afterwards. It would really be a cagey game. But you're looking at the odds and the form of the Gunners, and it would be almost impossible to bet against them at this point, of the season. It's always impossible for you to bet against Arsenal with the form they are playing with currently, especially looking at the fact that they've only lost once in all competition at home this season. Now, let's take a look at the game Manchester City will be playing. They will be traveling all the way to the Olympic Stadium to take on West Ham United. Now, West Ham United are also not in a very, very good place. Let's not forget that, in midweek, they went all the way to the Craven Cottage in the London Derby. They beat Fulham by a lone goal, which gives them a huge boost as far as, their Premier League, survival is concerned. It's a big boost, especially looking at the fact that a team like Nottingham Forest, they didn't lose to Manchester City, but then they also managed to get a draw. But then for West Ham, it's good they are closing in because they are moving away, from the last two teams. That's Wolverhampton Wanderers and then also Burnley. But then how strong, has this Manchester City team been under Pep Guardiola this season? Let's not forget that a player like Erling Haaland has been quiet. He's not scored for close to 5 game weeks now, and that's a problem for them. Now, many people are calling this Manchester City team the Erling Haaland team. Why? Because once he fails to score, they struggle to win. Let's not forget that the previous match weeks we've seen Antoine Semenyo take over the baton, and hit the goals for them. Now, in their game as well against Nottingham Forest, which saw them draw 2-2, we saw Semenyo score again. So it looks like Semenyo is the more likely scorer for Manchester City than even Erling Haaland at this point, because the goals are not coming, the assists are not coming for the Norwegian international. But you would always fancy Manchester City to go to Olympic Stadium and beat a team like West Ham United. But then don't expect West Ham United, to go down without putting up a fight. And that's how cagey it could get. You'd always say Arsenal will have a relatively easier fixture, especially when they're playing at home against Everton, as compared to West Ham United hosting Manchester City, because West Ham United themselves, they are not really sitting comfortable as far as the league log is concerned, and they would really want to take the game to Manchester City. The title race is getting interesting, but then, it's the English Premier League where any game is so unpredictable. I don't know what your predictions will be, but then 7 points separating Arsenal and Manchester City heading into the weekend round of games. Who do you think is winning? Who is dropping points? Do you think Arsenal have got what it takes to extend that lead at the top of the table, or you think that this weekend we'll see Manchester City closing on the Gunners?